You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
We're back again discussing the probable cause affidavit in the Idaho 4 case. When we left off last time, we had covered numerous bits of information, including that bombshell statement from roommate DM about possibly seeing the suspect. Bill, what are one or two takeaways from last time that you'd like our listeners to keep in mind as we finish this affidavit today?
As we were talking about last time, I just think it's really important to understand that the affidavit itself is only a snapshot, and they're trying to give us an overview, but not everything that law enforcement has necessarily discovered. So at this point, we start to discuss video, and they did this video canvas, a collection of all the available video that they could find, and understand that they have chosen some highlights here to include in the affidavit. There could be dozens of additional videos that helped law enforcement build a timeline around a suspect and put this suspect near the house in question where the murders took place, before the murders, during the time of the murders, and after the murders. I'll let you continue.
When they say video canvas, what I'm imagining is it's coming from three sources: security cams, Ring doorbells, and traffic cams. That's what I'm guessing it is. Can you think of anything else that might be providing this kind of footage?
I don't know how many traffic cams, for example.
Yeah, I don't know either.
When we talk about cases that are older, like the Colonial Parkway murders, people will often ask us, do you have video from here, there, or anywhere? And back in the day, cameras were pretty rare. Post 9/11, we've had a lot of cameras, and we're all walking around with cell phones with cameras. You can go on from traffic cams, security cams at various businesses, security cams at homes. I have security cameras here. I don't think about it necessarily in those terms, but if law enforcement ever came to me and asked me, could we see footage from your security cam? Of course, I'd say sure. And it's all being saved to the cloud. So when you put out the word, as law enforcement did here, Moscow PD and the law enforcement partners, they actually were able to secure a fair amount of footage. They actually had teams from all three agencies reviewing footage. Obviously, they're looking for a particular car and looking for it at particular locations, but it's still a lot of video footage. There's a lot more going on with video cameras today than has ever happened before.
Agreed. All right, we're picking up from the affidavit. A review of camera footage indicated that a white sedan hereafter suspect vehicle 1 was observed traveling westbound in the 700 block of Indian Hills Drive in Moscow at approximately 3:26 a.m., so that's before the murders, and westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 in Moscow at approximately 3:28 a.m. On this video, it appeared suspect vehicle 1 was not displaying a front license plate.
I stopped at this point and did a little bit of quick research because I was curious.
Of course you did.
Isn't that the story of our lives?
This is what you do.
I was curious about something, which is, does Washington State require 2 plates? Answer, yes. Does Pennsylvania require 2 plates, front and back? Answer, no.
No.
So they use 1 plate in Pennsylvania and 2 plates in Washington State. Every state is different.
Yep. It's 2 in Virginia. What is it in Connecticut?
2. Interesting. At first, when I read this, I thought, oh, he must have taken his front plate off. And then I said, wait a minute, let's go look. If the car's registered in Pennsylvania, which is where suspect Bryan Kohberger is from and his family is from, the vehicle was originally registered in Pennsylvania. That comes out later. I realized, oh, he didn't take his front plate off. He doesn't have a front plate. And so that makes this car that much more distinctive.
Yes. A review of footage from multiple videos obtained from the King Road neighborhood showed multiple sightings of suspect vehicle 1 starting at 3:29 a.m., ending at 4:20 a.m. These sightings show suspect vehicle 1 makes an initial 3 passes by the 1122 King Road residence and then leave via Walenta Drive. Based off of my experience as a patrol officer, this is a residential neighborhood with a very limited number of vehicles that travel in the area during the early morning hours. Upon review of the video, there are only a few cars that enter and exit this area during this time frame. So he was making passes through the neighborhood and past the house again and again.
For all the talk about this guy being some sort of criminal mastermind, here he is driving his car with out-of-state plates past the crime scene 3 times. This is just on the evening of the murders.
Not Leopold and Loeb, this guy is not. And remember, they didn't get away with it either. Suspect vehicle 1 can be seen entering the area a 4th time at approximately 4:04 a.m. It can be seen driving eastbound on King Road, stopping and turning around in front of 500 Queen Road 52, and then driving back westbound on King Road. When suspect vehicle 1 is in front of the King Road residence, it appears to unsuccessfully attempt to park or turn around in the road. The vehicle then continued to the intersection of Queen Road and King Road, where it can be seen completing a 3-point turn and then driving eastbound again down Queen Road. So what is it now, 4 passes past this house?
It is, and credit to law enforcement here. They're able to build like a really amazing word picture, and there would be pictures available at trial, showing all of the movements of this vehicle. So they've captured this vehicle driving past the crime scene now 3 times, and then a 4th time coming back, and this is actually now leading up to the time of the murders.
And this is also a really good reminder for anybody who thinks that if you think that you're doing things unnoticed, you're not. You don't know what kind of video cameras and Ring doorbells and what else is available on the street where you live, but this guy evidently thought he was going to be able to get away with passing the house a number of times. He didn't look at all these cameras that caught him. Suspect vehicle 1 is next seen departing the area of the King Road residence at approximately 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed. Suspect vehicle 1 is next observed traveling southbound on Walenta Drive. Based on my knowledge of the area and a review of camera footage in the neighborhood that does not show suspect vehicle 1 during that time frame, I believe suspect vehicle 1 likely exited the neighborhood at Palos Road Drive and Conestoga Drive. Palos River Drive is at the southern edge of Moscow and proceeds into Whitman County, Washington. Eventually, the road leads to Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington is approximately 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. Both Pullman and Moscow are small college towns, and people commonly travel back and forth between them. Law enforcement officers provided video footage of suspect vehicle 1 to forensic examiners with the Federal Bureau of Investigation that regularly utilize surveillance footage to identify the year, make, and model of an unknown vehicle that is observed by 1 or more cameras during the commission of a criminal offense. The forensic examiner has approximately 35 years law enforcement experience with 12 years at the FBI. His specific training includes identifying unique characteristics of vehicles, and he uses a database that gives visual clues of vehicles across states to identify differences between vehicles. After reviewing the numerous observations of suspect vehicle 1, the forensic examiner initially believed that suspect vehicle 1 was a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra. Upon further review, he indicated it could also be a 2011 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra. As a result, investigators have been reviewing information on persons in possession of a vehicle that is a 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra.
This is another area where people, particularly in social media, were going absolutely gaga because the initial All Points Bulletin referenced the fact that law enforcement was looking for this 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra. As it turns out, the suspect, Kohberger, was driving a 2015 Elantra. Law enforcement had already modified their be on the lookout for word about what vehicle they were looking for. And this is in early December, as I recall. This is way before any arrests are made. They had already expanded the search those of us that follow cars, and I consider myself a bit of a car guy, also know that even when vehicles are introduced year to year, they don't change a tremendous amount. I know the Elantra, it hasn't really changed all that much. They've tweaked some headlights or taillights or whatever, a few design changes. Typically, they will make minor cosmetic changes or improvements to technology, but the cars themselves are not radically changing style. I couldn't criticize law enforcement for coming back and saying, we're going to expand the vehicle we're looking for to include a 5-year range from 2011 to 2016. That didn't surprise me at all. And the fact that they ultimately arrested Bryan Kohberger driving a car that fit those parameters makes perfect sense.
Exactly. Investigators were given access to video footage on the Washington State University campus located in Pullman, Washington. A review of that video indicated that at approximately 2:44 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, a white sedan, which was consistent with the description of the white Elantra known as Suspect Vehicle 1, was observed on WSU surveillance cameras traveling north on Southeast Nevada Street at Northeast Stadium Way. At approximately 2:53 a.m., a white sedan, consistent with the description of the white Elantra known as Suspect Vehicle 1, was observed traveling southeast on Nevada Street in Pullman, Washington, toward SR 270. SR 270 connects Pullman, Washington to Moscow, Idaho. This camera footage from Pullman, Washington was provided to the same FBI forensic examiner. The forensic examiner identified the vehicle observed in Pullman, Washington as being a 2014 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra.
Now, keep in mind, we covered in our last episode the fact that this was a quiet residential neighborhood. This is the place where the murders took place. Once the law enforcement team knew what vehicle they were looking for and began identifying vehicles, they were able to actually begin to build a pretty strong timeline in terms of where this particular vehicle, or one matching its description, was going from to. And despite some efforts, which we get into in a minute here, for the suspect to hide his location, he's making the decision to drive late at night in residential neighborhoods, which are very quiet. It isn't like they're looking at hundreds or even thousands of vehicles. They're looking at a handful of vehicles at key points. And so ultimately, with a fair amount of good, solid detective work, they're actually able to build a pretty tight timeline, starting all the way back from Pullman, Washington, which is likely where the suspect left from sometime going on 3 a.m.
At approximately 5:25 a.m., a white sedan, which was consistent with the description of Suspect Vehicle 1, was observed on 5 cameras in Pullman, Washington, and on WSU campus cameras. The first camera that recorded the white sedan was located at 1300 Johnson Road in Pullman. The white sedan was observed traveling northbound on Johnson Road. Johnson Road leads directly back to West Palouse River Drive in Moscow, which intersects with Conestoga Drive. The white sedan was then observed turning north on Bishop Boulevard and northeast on SR 270. At approximately 5:27 a.m., the white Elantra was observed cameras traveling northbound on Stadium Way and Nevada Street, Stadium Way at Grimes Way, Stadium Drive at Wilson Road, and Stadium Way at Cougar Way. Then there's a couple of pictures here depicting the different routes that the suspect vehicle drove.
This is really solid police work. And if this case goes to trial, they will bury this guy with all of this technology. They basically mapped out, here's when he leaves his apartment in Pullman, Washington, at the college campus where he's teaching. They've basically got him dead to rights from the time he leaves his apartment in Pullman, Washington, goes to the crime scene, passes by the crime scene 3 times, stops the 4th time, kills the 4 people, then gets back in his car and drives back. He drives around for a while, it would appear, and you could see that possibility with the adrenaline's flowing, etc. And ultimately, they put him back at his apartment, it would appear, around 5:30 in the morning. They've got this guy dead to rights. And as I said, and I'll keep repeating, this isn't all they will be able to put together an unbelievably strong case against their suspect.
On November 25th, 2022, MPD asked area law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for white Hyundai Elantras in the area. On November 29th, so it's 4 days later, at approximately 12:28 a.m., Washington State University police officer Daniel Tanego queried white Elantra registered at WSU. As a result of that query, he located a 2015 white Elantra with a Pennsylvania license plate LFZ 8649. This vehicle was registered to Bryan Kohberger, hereafter Kohberger, residing at 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment 201, Pullman, Washington. 1630 Northeast Valley Road is approximately 3/4 of a mile from the intersection of Stadium Way and Cougar Way, the last camera location that picked up the Elantra. The same day at approximately 12:58 a.m., WSU officer Curtis Whitman was looking for white Hyundai Elantras and located a 2015 white Elantra at 1630 Northeast Valley Road in Pullman in the parking lot. 1630 Northeast Valley Road is an apartment complex that houses WSU students. Officer Whitman also ran the car and it returned to Kohberger with a Washington tag. I reviewed Kohberger's Washington State driver's license information and photograph. The license identifies that Kohberger is a white male with a height of 6 feet and weighs 185 pounds. Additionally, the photograph of Kohberger shows that he has bushy eyebrows. Kohberger's physical description is consistent with the description of the male DM saw inside the King Road residence on November 13th. Further investigation, including a review of Latah County Sheriff's Deputy Corporal Duke's body cam and reports, showed that on August 21st, 2022, Bryan Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop that occurred in Moscow, Idaho by Corporal Duke. At the time, Kohberger, who was the sole occupant, was driving a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plate LFZ 8649, which was set to expire on November 30th, 2022. During the stop, which was recorded via a law enforcement body cam, Kohberger provided his phone number as, and that's redacted, hereafter the 8458 phone as his cellular telephone number. Investigators conducted electronic database queries and learned that the 8458 phone is a number issued by AT&T.
At this point, it's all coming together, and this is at the end of November. Keep in mind, simultaneous to this effort in the car, they now know they're looking for a particular Hyundai Elantra from the 2015 model year, white. They find a car with the Pennsylvania plates. Lo and behold, we actually have a traffic stop with Bryan Kohberger being pulled over. There's just one thing building on another, and this is, again, outstanding police work. They're building a case against this guy step by step.
Yeah, and it's 2 traffic stops, by the way. There's one in August, and then it says on October 14th, 2022, Bryan Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop by a WSU police officer. Upon review of that body cam and a report of the stop, Kohberger was the sole occupant and was driving a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plate LFZ 8649. So it sounds like they're trying to establish that, like, this is his regular car, and he's been stopped a number of times.
Sure, absolutely. And they're doing really solid work here.
On November 18th, 2022, according to Washington State licensing, Kohberger registered the 2015 white Elantra with Washington and later received Washington plate CFB 8708. Prior to this time, the 2015 white Elantra was registered in Pennsylvania, which does not require a front license plate to be displayed. This was learned through communication with a Pennsylvania officer who is currently certified in the state of Pennsylvania. Based on my own experience in communication with Washington law enforcement, I know that Idaho and Washington require front and back license plates to be displayed. Investigators believe that Kohberger is still driving the 2015 white Elantra because his vehicle was captured on December 13th, 2022 by a license plate reader in Loma, Colorado. Information provided by a query to a database. Kohberger's Elantra was then queried on December 15th, 2022 by law enforcement in Hancock County, Indiana. On December 16th, 2022, at approximately 2:26 p.m., surveillance video showed Kohberger's Elantra in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. The sole occupant of the vehicle was a white male whose description was consistent with Kohberger. Kohberger has family in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, learned through a TLO search and locate tool database inquiry.
This is the part where those ubiquitous traffic cameras can basically place you, or your car certainly, in any number of locations. I believe by this point, when Kohberger left Washington State to head back to Pennsylvania with his father, who had flown out to join him for the trip, which, by the way, doesn't strike me as that unusual. My older brother, Richard, has done this several times with his kids who were grown-ups in their 20s and even 30s now. For fun, Richard would fly to a particular location and drive with them across the country, just road trip kind of thing. So this didn't surprise me at all that his father would fly out to Idaho or Washington State to drive back with his son for the holidays. I don't think the father knows anything about his son being involved in a series of brutal homicides or being a suspect or anything like that. I think it's actually a much more lighthearted kind of road trip.
No, agreed. Based on information provided on the WSU website, Kohberger is currently a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. Pursuant to records provided by a member of the interview panel for Pullman Police Department, we learned that Kohberger's past education included undergraduate degrees in psychology and cloud-based forensics. These records also showed Kohberger wrote an essay when he applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department in the fall of 2022. Kohberger wrote in his essay he had interest in assisting rural law enforcement agencies with how to better collect and analyze technological data in public safety operations. Quite frankly, I don't think they need that right now. I think they're doing fine on their own. They
seem to be doing great, and he seems to be completely losing sight of the fact that this may be a rural area and these two towns may be relatively small, but together with their law enforcement partners from the Idaho State Police and the FBI and this thing we call the World Wide Web, they seem to be doing really well.
Yeah, they're doing fine. Kohberger also posted a Reddit survey, which can be found by an open source internet search. The survey asked the participants to provide information to, quote, understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime.
Yeah, this is a strange one. And I know a lot of people saw that information from the Reddit survey. It is very weird, and there's no question about it.
Yeah. I also want to make sure that we take a minute and address what has been a pretty contentious subject on social media, and that is the fact that Bryan Kohberger did study with our friend and colleague, Dr. Catherine Ramsland at DeSales University. The fact that there have been people on the internet dragging Dr. Ramsland for not knowing a psychopath when she was teaching one, I'm absolutely appalled that there is anybody who is stooping that low.
The idea that anyone, even someone as expert as Dr. Ramsland, who is a PhD and a criminologist and has written, I think she's coming up on her 70th book.
Yeah.
As you and I have talked about numerous times over the last few weeks, Kristin, all of us who are students at different times in our lives have figured out that there is a public face that we all present, for the most part, in a classroom situation. And this guy, Kohberger, who has been through high school, junior college, a master's, both at DeSales University, and then applied to and was accepted into a doctoral program at Washington State. I know there's been a lot of reporting by people that knew this guy that he's an odd duck. He's sometimes considered arrogant, socially awkward. He has a tendency to argue the point, particularly with female classmates. I could go on from there. My point is this. He's also someone that is capable of putting forward a public face. To say that Dr. Ramsland, who we consider a friend, and she's certainly been on our podcast and has been really helpful to us, especially to you guys who have developed a good relationship. I would call it a friendship. I don't think that's presumptuous. The idea that Dr. Ramsland or any of us would be able to recognize someone as a potential murderer. Remember, this time frame that she spends with him in the classroom is over a couple of years span, but he's putting his best face forward. So this is like saying that anybody that ever worked with any murderer is supposed to be able to figure out in advance that they're capable of something like this.
Yeah. One of my friends, when we were talking about it, said he certainly doesn't think that John Douglas walks down the street pointing at people and going, hey, I bet that guy's a psychopath. That he sets fires to things, that he abuses his dog. That's not how it works. And especially as educators, we are not soothsayers. I have been in education 15 years now. And yeah, I've had students who have gone on to commit crimes, small to big. I could not have told you by looking at them. That was something that was going to happen. Every kid that I've ever taught, I maybe have not been overjoyed to be in conversation with every single student that I have ever taught, but I have never had a student that I looked at and was like, you know what, that kid's a criminal. That has never happened to me.
And a future criminal. It isn't
exactly
like that Dr. Ramsland and another college professor also referenced the fact that she had taught Kohberger at DeSales. They weren't even teaching him at the time of the murders. Yes, it was a few months before, but that's like saying spot the killer. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
As we had alluded to in this past episode, there was this awful shooting here just a week or two ago. That teacher would not ever have looked at her 6-year-old student and thought, you know what? That kid's going to get violent. That kid's going to bring a gun to school. Teachers are not soothsayers. We cannot read our children the way that people seem to be presuming that Dr. Ramsland could. Yeah, she's an expert. Absolutely she is. But as you mentioned, Bill, and as I will attest as being a current educator, we can never actually really know the face that a person is presenting to us. How my kids are to me in my classroom is very different from how they are at home with their friends, at their job, or whatever else, I am sure. For anybody to go out there and drag Dr. Ramsland for, she wrote a book called How to Catch a Killer. How did she not know this guy was a killer? That's obtuse and it's insulting.
And the point of the How to Catch a Killer book, by the way, is how to catch a killer after they've committed crimes. There was that movie that came out a few years ago all about precognition, sci-fi thing. But that's not how it works in the real world.
Exactly.
One of the most unfortunate incidents surrounding this case was the dragging of Dr. Ramsland by Kerry Rawson.
Oh, gosh. I'm not going to be as forthright about this as I want to, because really what I want to do is curse and spit. And I'm not going to do that. I'm really not. Because, look, do I feel bad for what Kerry Rawson went through having a serial killer for a father? Yeah, I totally do. I really feel badly for her. And I'm sorry that she dealt with that kind of trauma growing up. That's terrible. I read her book. I thought her book was amazing. But having gone through that does not in any way, shape, or form give you the right to speak out to the press and say, oh, he had Dr. Ramsland as a professor. I bet she introduced him to my father. What an irresponsible supposition to make.
For those of you, if you're not familiar with Kerry Rawson's name, she is the daughter of Dennis Rader, who's referred to commonly as the BTK killer. Rader is someone that Dr. Ramsland has studied as part of the work that she's done involving serial killers, and they actually ended up writing a book together. Now, Kerry Rawson has also written a book where she talks about growing up as the daughter of a serial killer, and I met Kerry Rawson at CrimeCon. We had a cordial conversation. I cannot blame Kerry Rawson for the sins of her father. Was I completely comfortable talking to someone who came up and introduced herself as, I'm the daughter of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer? I was the brother of a murder victim. I wasn't terribly comfortable, but we had a polite conversation. I think she's got a little bit of a cottage industry going as the daughter of a serial killer. I struggle a little bit here because she has a right to speak out, but I think she moved into an area where she was grossly irresponsible. She made a massive supposition that somehow Bryan Kohberger, because he had studied with Dr. Ramsland, was given access to Dennis Rader, who's still serving time for his crimes, which is absurd. And it's now come out over the last few days, actually some responsible journalists, although they may be sensationalistic, they actually did some digging on this, reached out to Rader, asked him if any of his daughter's allegations about Dr. Ramsland putting Bryan Kohberger, her student, in touch with Rader were true. And of course, they weren't true. She was a responsible professor. She's not going to put a master's degree student in touch with a serial killer. It just didn't happen. What I think is sad is that Kerry Rawson made these baseless accusations and that certain journalists who will remain nameless were so irresponsible that they ran lengthy interviews with her where she went on and on about how Ramsland, and she always refers to her only as Ramsland, never Dr. Ramsland. And last time I checked, she earned that title and that PhD. And she was allowed to just go on and on with something that was complete bullshit, which is he obviously had contact with my father. And then no one fact checks any of this stuff, even though one of the key journalists has actually done some very good work in covering this case. The fact that he allowed Kerry Rawson to go on and on with a lie and a supposition is so irresponsible. Kerry Rawson needs to zip it. She needs to stop saying irresponsible and dangerous things and slagging other people and attempting to ruin their reputation because she doesn't like the fact that this pretty eminent criminologist co-wrote a book about her father as part of this doctor's study of serial killers, just like John Douglas and many other experts before. It does make sense to study serial killers so we can understand how their minds work, try to prevent similar crimes, and capture other serial killers. Kerry Rawson, maybe this bought her another 15 minutes worth of fame, but as far as I'm concerned, Kerry Rawson can zip it and stop spreading lies and suppositions about people that she doesn't even know particularly well.
Agreed. We are, in case that hasn't made it clear enough, we stand with Dr. Ramsland. She is our colleague. She is our friend. And the fact that she has been dragged by the press through this is just absolutely inexcusable. You can take that from us. And if you don't want to take it from us, take it from Dennis Rader himself, who did categorically state he was never in contact with Bryan Kohberger. We'll go ahead and continue with the affidavit here. As part of this investigation, law enforcement obtained search warrants to determine cellular devices that utilize cellular towers in close proximity to the King Road residence on November 13th, 2022, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. After determining that Kohberger was associated to both the 2015 Elantra and the 8458 phone, investigators reviewed these search warrant returns. A query of the 8458 phone in these returns did not show the 8458 phone utilizing cellular towers in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Based on my training, experience, and conversation with law enforcement officers that specialize in the utilization of cellular telephone records as part of investigations, individuals can either leave their cellular telephone at a different location before committing a crime or turn their cellular telephone off prior to going to a location to commit a crime. This is done by subjects in an effort to avoid alerting law enforcement that a cellular device associated with them was in a particular area when a crime is committed. I also know that on numerous occasions, subjects will surveil an area where they intend to commit a crime prior to the date of the crime. Depending on the circumstances, this could be done a few days before or for several months prior to the commission of a crime. During these types of surveillance, it is possible that an individual would not leave their cellular telephone at a separate location or turn it off since they do not plan to commit an offense on that particular day.
Very interesting observations here. And
yes,
again, for all this talk on the internet about this brilliant PhD student and how he's trying to pull off the perfect crime, he doesn't seem to be doing anything close to that, and doesn't seem to have gotten in the habit of turning off his cell phone before he drove past the residence where the murders took place. And as you'll see, it turns out that he drove by there, and even on the night of the murder, he appears to have turned his phone off, at least allegedly committed the murders, and then he turned his phone back on before he was back at his apartment. Why not just set yourself up with a tracking device? All of us driving around, walking around, whatever, with a cell phone in our pocket have, in a situation like this where you've got an in-depth investigation, we've handed law enforcement a tremendous tool to track our whereabouts, at least where our cars and phones are. In many examples, coupled with other information, they can pretty much determine where we were and when we arrived at a place and when we left a place.
Our friend Mac very memorably said on her Facebook page, with regard to whether or not Kohberger was a criminal mastermind, she said, "You can read about cooking, but that don't mean you can cook." And she's I had never thought of it that way, but she's exactly right. The more rated expression that she used was, "You can read the Kama Sutra, but that don't make you Casanova." And God bless you.
I love Cheryl McCollum, and
I love her.
And I'm a proud fan of Max. Part of what just makes me laugh so hard is she's a brilliant investigator and crime scene analyst, and she's got these hysterical expressions that I don't think anybody else uses.
No.
And they're perfect. So
Yes.
her kind of dismissive
I love
put
that.
downs of this particular suspect's criminal expertise are just a hoot.
We're very much looking forward to talking to Mac here in the next couple of recording days. And I'm definitely going to ask her to put that expression on a shirt, maybe sell it.
We got to ask her where some of these come from.
Oh, it was fantastic.
My favorite was you can read the Kama Sutra, but that don't make you Casanova. I want that on a t-shirt.
I want that on a shirt. Yeah, absolutely.
And forgive us for taking a lighthearted moment here in a otherwise serious conversation.
On December 23rd, 2022, I applied for and was granted a search warrant for historical phone records between November 12th, 2022 at 12 a.m. and November 14th at 12 a.m. for the 8458 phone held by the phone provider AT&T, approximately 24 hours preceding and following the times of the homicides. On December 23rd, 2022, pursuant to that search warrant, I received records for the 8458 phone from AT&T. These records indicated that the 8458 phone is subscribed to Bryan Kohberger at an address in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and the account has been open since June 23rd, 2022. These records also included historical cell site location information for the 8458 phone. After receiving this information, I consulted with an FBI special agent that is certified as a member of the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, CAST. Members of CAST are certified with the FBI to provide expert testimony in the field of historical cell site location information and are required to pass extensive training that includes both written and practical examinations prior to be certified with CAST, as well as the completion of yearly certification requirements. Additionally, the FBI CAST special agent that I consulted with has over 15 years of federal law enforcement experience, which includes 6 years with the FBI. From information provided by CAST, I was able to determine estimated locations for the 8458 phone from November 12th, 2022 to November 13th, 2022, the time period authorized by this court.
Let's talk about this for a second. Kristin, you're going to get into some interesting detail coming up here. Let's talk about cell phones for just a second. What most of us don't think about is that a cell phone is actually a two-way radio. We all say, oh, my cell phone, my phone, that sort of thing. It's actually not a telephone. It's actually a two-way radio designed to act like a wired landline telephone. What a cell phone does is it sends out a signal, basically like a two-way radio, to cell phone towers, and it will ping, and Kristin gets into more detail in a second, off these cell phone towers, and through triangulation, that is the location where the phone is placed, and the two closest cell phone towers, because the device sends a signal seeking the closest radio tower those microwave arrays we see all over the country. And it either succeeds or doesn't succeed in making a connection, and as we've all suffered with weak cell phone signals at different times. Moscow Police Department, once again, is extremely smart, very astute in reaching out to the people that are the greatest experts. In this case, the FBI, the CAST team, and there are these certified experts with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. Moscow PD might not have a CAST team member in a small department, but they are really smart in recognizing when they need help and who to go to. And they get the best people in the country, if not the world, to assist them in building an understanding of how these systems work and where this guy's cell phone was being utilized.
Exactly. Back to the affidavit. On November 13th, 2022, at approximately 2:42 a.m., so this is the day of the murders, the 8458 phone was utilizing cellular resources that provide coverage to 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment G201, Pullman, Washington, thereafter the Kohberger residence. At approximately 2:47 a.m., the 8458 phone utilized cellular resources that provided coverage southeast of the Kohberger residence, consistent with the 8458 phone leaving the residence and traveling south through Pullman, Washington. This is consistent with the movement of the white Elantra. At approximately 2:47 a.m., the 8458 phone stops reporting to the network, which is consistent with either the phone being in an area without cellular coverage, the connection to the network is disabled, such as putting the phone in airplane mode, or that the phone is turned off. The 8458 phone does not report to the network again until approximately 4:48 a.m., at which time it utilized cellular resources that provide coverage to Idaho State Highway 95, south of Moscow, Idaho, near Blaine, Idaho, north of Genesee. Between 4:50 a.m. and 5:26 a.m., the phone utilizes cellular resources that are consistent with the 8458 phone traveling south on State Highway 95 to Genesee, then traveling west toward Uniontown, and then north back into Pullman, Washington.
This appears then that he has turned the cell phone off on the evening in question, that is the evening of the murders, and then turned the phone back on while returning and then taking this very circuitous route back to Pullman, Washington, which is where his apartment's located. I don't know if there's an attempt to deceive or if he's decompressing perhaps from the quadruple murders he's just committed. There's something very strange about the turning off the cell phone shortly after leaving his apartment, and then the cell phone turns back on and does this very roundabout route. It's basically the equivalent, I think, of dropping digital breadcrumbs. Mm-hmm. The video that shows the Hyundai Elantra driving from one location to another and this cell phone tracking data, law enforcement is basically able to outline precisely where he and the car and the phone have been that evening.
Yeah. At approximately 5:30 a.m., the 8458 phone is utilizing resources that provide coverage to Pullman, Washington, and consistent with the phone traveling back to the Kohberger residence. The 8458 phone's movements are consistent with the movements of the white Elantra that is observed traveling north on Stadium Drive at approximately 5:27 a.m. Based on a review of the 8458 phone's estimated location and travel, the 8458 phone's travel is consistent with that of the white Elantra. Again, this is awesome police work. Further review indicated that the 8458 phone utilized cellular resources on November 13th that are consistent with the 8458 phone leaving the area of the Kohberger residence at approximately 9 a.m. and traveling to Moscow. So he's leaving his own residence and going back toward the scene of the homicide.
Correct.
Specifically, the 8458 phone utilized cellular resources that would provide coverage to the King Road residence between 9:12 a.m. and 9:21 a.m. So I'm guessing he went back to see if anybody had discovered the bodies yet. That's my guess.
Yeah, there's been some question, and I think this is legitimate. Could he have swung by there to check it out, as you said, to see perhaps if an alarm has been sounded?
Oh, what do you want to bet he figured out he dropped the sheath?
I think that's a very likely possibility, and some people have theorized that. And that doesn't strike me as odd. If he's gotten home and come down from the adrenaline high of killing the 4 individuals the night before, he's obviously not gotten a lot of sleep because he came in at 5:30 in the morning. Just a few hours later, cell phone data seems to indicate that he's back in the neighborhood. I think he may have, I don't think he would choose to go inside the house. That would be crazy, although this whole thing is insane. But perhaps looking around to see, is it possible that he dropped the sheath or the knife? Might have occurred to him. I'm not sure that he would have necessarily put a bloody knife back into its sheath, but he might have thought, did I drop it when I got out of the car or something like that? He might have swung by for the reason you outlined to see if the alarm has come up. Is there anybody from law enforcement there? Has anyone called 911? Have they discovered the bodies? Or he's looking around to see, did I drop that knife sheath somewhere?
Because we all know what it's like if you've lost a wallet or keys or something like that. You're going back to retrace your steps to figure out, did I drop it someplace? Where is it? Is it in the parking lot? Like, where did it go? I imagine he was probably going, oh, crap, where'd it go?
But speaking of not a criminal mastermind, this whole idea of returning to the scene of the crime, there's an outside chance that he might find the sheath. Wouldn't you regard this as incredibly risky behavior?
You would think, but again, like I said last episode, Leopold and Loeb, this guy is not. We have several more bits of information to provide with regard to this probable cause affidavit, and we will continue that, as well as some final thoughts from us in our next episode of Mind Over Murder. As always, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.